So this guy pretended to be a U.S. Marshal. Badge, tactical vest, flashing lights on the dash, the whole thing. His name is Jerry Banks, and at the time he did it, he had a day job in a county jail as a correction officer. And he used that costume to walk a father of 6 out of his own house in handcuffs. Greg Davis never came home. They found him in a snowbank, still in the cuffs. And the man who paid for it is serving life right now. Serhat Gumrukcu, who told the world he'd found a cure for HIV, and people believed him. But he wasn't a doctor at all. And I'll be honest with you, the way he explained it on the stand is worse than the lie itself. He told a jury he paid for his medical degree. A Russian university, no training. And when they put it to him on the stand, he just said, "It was cheating, of course. I was arrogant. I thought I could decide what I wanted to learn." And that is the man a NASDAQ-listed company was about to hand a fortune to. And he treated people. One of them was a cancer patient here in the States. No proper license. And that man died. He took more than $150,000 from that man's family. He paid it back only after they sued him. Because in 2017, he was putting together a biotech merger, and prosecutors later valued his stake at over $100 million in stock. And while he was closing that, he was facing felony fraud charges in California over checks that bounced. He'd signed those checks HRH, as in His Royal Highness, because he had been going around telling people he was a prince. And that merger would close about a week after Greg Davis was murdered. Now, Greg Davis was a commodities guy, 49 years old, 6 kids, and a house on a back road in Danville, Vermont. He'd moved the family up from New Jersey a few years earlier, and he was working at a waste cleanup company over in Barrie. So in 2015, he got into an oil deal. Buy the crude at one price and sell it on at a higher one. And the profit on paper ran into the millions. But Greg never actually dealt with Gumrukcu directly, because there was a middleman sitting between them, relaying every message back and forth. Gumrukcu said he controlled an oil company registered in Oman, and that he had the money to fund it. And to prove he had it, the deal needed one document, a bank letter confirming £22 million sitting in an account somewhere. It arrived by email at the end of January, from a bank called Cyprus First. And this one document is the reason a man in Vermont would be dead 3 years later. Greg and the middleman ran that letter down almost immediately, and it did not take them long. But Cyprus First Bank did not exist. Not in Cyprus, not anywhere. There was simply no such bank, and I don't think I need to tell you what that means about the man who sent it. So the deal collapsed, and then they tried it again. A second company, a second set of emails, and a Turkish bank this time. Prosecutors would later say those were false too, and by then, Greg had worked out exactly what he was dealing with, which is the moment this stops being a business dispute. And by 2017, Greg wasn't asking polite questions anymore, because he had started talking about taking what he had to the authorities. And then, and you'll see why in about 10 seconds, he backed off completely and agreed to stand down. Because money came. Partial payments, tens of thousands of dollars. And for a while, the pressure came off, which is the last time this story had an ordinary ending available to it. Then the payments stopped, and prosecutors say Gumrukcu and his friend simply stopped answering the middleman at all. So in late December, Greg picked it back up, and this time he put a number on it. $980,000 to walk away. He wrote it out in a message, and prosecutors say he named Gumrukcu and his brother, both of them. His own words. Let's hopefully close that matter and move forward. Without this, our hands will be forced to turn this into authorities, which neither party wants. That message was sent 2 days before he died. And a man who's about to be paid off does not usually get murdered 4 days later. Because in July, 6 months before he died, prosecutors say a man named Burke Aratai sat down and wrote out everything about Greg. Full name, date of birth, place of birth, and a mobile number with a Vermont area code. Aratai was Gumrukcu's close friend. They'd known each other in Turkey, where they'd both worked as magicians. And not card tricks, mind reading, which somehow came up at his own murder trial. Between June and October, prosecutors say more than $150,000 moved out of Turkish accounts and into Eretai's own account, and they say he quietly turned that money into cash as it arrived. Eretai needed someone who could find a killer, so he went to Nevada, to a friend called Aaron Etheridge. So Etheridge went looking for someone who would do it, with more than $100,000 to cover it. And here's the part that should tell you something. 2 people turned him down. But the third man said yes, Jerry Banks, from Fort Garland, Colorado. And I honestly can't get past what he did for a living. And Banks had a job at the time, which is the part I keep coming back to. He was a detention officer. He worked in a county jail. And on the night Greg Davis was murdered, Banks was still on that sheriff's office payroll. So in November, he drove all the way out to Vermont, and not to kill Greg, but to watch him. His first plan had been a rifle, from somewhere out in the trees. But the house sat too far down a remote road, so he reported back that getting to Greg was hard. And prosecutors say the answer to that got discussed out loud. Killing the whole family. And I want you to sit with that for a second, because it was raised, and discussed, and then dropped, but it was raised. So instead, he decided to lure Greg out. And to do that, he had to become someone. So he bought one. An antique gold U.S. Marshal's badge off the internet, with the patches to go with it. Then handcuffs, and then automotive parts that investigators said could be used to build a silencer. Then a white Ford Explorer, and a police interceptor nameplate to bolt onto the back of it. So on the 3rd of January, he started driving, and Greg Davis had 3 days left. Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Massachusetts, and then Vermont. And on the 5th, he stopped at a Walmart in Clearfield, Pennsylvania, and bought a cheap prepaid phone, paying with a $100 bill. That phone made exactly 2 calls in its entire life. The first was 4 seconds long, the next afternoon, to a Pizza Hut in St. Johnsbury. So by Saturday the 6th of January, he was sitting in Danville, parked in the dark and waiting, and Greg Davis had about 4 hours left. And I need you to know how that Saturday had gone inside that house, because you'd never guess it from what came next. The Davis family had spent the whole day celebrating, because that morning, Greg and Melissa had told the kids that Melissa was pregnant, with their 7th. 12, 10, 8, 6, 3, and 1. And that was the last day all 8 of them were ever in that house together, though nobody in it knew that when they went to bed. The second call was at 8:42 the following night, and it went to Vermont State Police. A man said he'd shot his wife, and that he was going to shoot himself next. Troopers went looking, but they couldn't find the road he'd named, and he hadn't given a town. The call came from within a mile of the Davis house, from that cheap phone. Prosecutors say Jerry Banks made that call himself, to pull the police away. And 15 minutes later, someone knocked on Greg Davis's door. A man in a mask, a jacket with a U.S. Marshal's emblem, handcuffs in one hand, and a rifle. Greg answered it, and then he came back to the bedroom and told Melissa a U.S. Marshal had come to arrest him. And then he got his clothes on. He went back and got dressed, to go and be arrested. Because he believed it. Why wouldn't he? He'd spent the better part of a year threatening to report a fraud, and the man at the door said the warrant was for racketeering, out of Virginia. His wife watched, pregnant, and the kids behind her. They watched him walk out of his own house in handcuffs. Their 12-year-old son looked past all of it, at the car. He told investigators all of it. White, 4 doors, red and blue lights on the dash. The affidavit puts it plainly, and it's the last line anyone ever wrote about Greg Davis alive. They went away together. What happened on that drive, we know from one place. Jerry Banks told a jury himself. Flat voice, matter of fact, like he was describing a delivery. So he drove Greg about 15 miles out into the dark, handcuffed, sitting in the back of a stranger's car. And somewhere on that road, Greg asked him a question. Banks told the jury what it was. He asked if he believed in God. And Banks said he told him, no. The plan had been a bridge, shoot him, put him in the water, somewhere Banks had already scouted. But driving in the dark, he couldn't find it again. So he pulled into a gravel turnout at the side of the road. And I still don't fully understand this part, because nothing about what happens next was the plan. Banks testified he told Greg to step out, so the handcuffs could be loosened, to make him more comfortable. And Greg stepped out of that car because he had been told the cuffs were coming off. And Banks shot him. 14 shots, a .22 caliber pistol with a homemade silencer on it. At least 8 of them hit him from behind, 2 of those in the head. Then he used his hands and his feet to push snow over him. And then he got back in the car and he drove away. The day after, he called Aaron Etheridge, the man in Nevada who'd hired him, and gave him 3 words. It was done. And for 4 years, that was the end of it. And Greg was found the next day in Barnett, beside the road, in a snowbank. And when they found him, and I don't know how else to say this, his hands were still cuffed behind his back. 6 children, a wife who was pregnant, a man who worked at a waste company over in Barrie and had moved his family up from New Jersey for a quieter life. That's who was lying 15 miles from his own front door, about 8 hours after he walked out of it, because he believed the man at that door was the law. And back at that house, nobody knew any of it yet. Now investigators had a suspect within hours because they knew about the oil deal almost immediately. But knowing it and proving it turned out to be 4 years apart. And they interviewed Gumrukcu twice in 2018. Both times, he lied. In neither of those interviews did he mention that Greg had been threatening to report him for fraud. Not once. And then, nothing. Months went by. Then a year. Then 2. So to everyone watching from the outside, that case had gone cold. And I'll be honest, that is exactly what the men who did it thought too. Prosecutors later put it in writing, and I don't think you can improve on how they said it. The men involved likely thought that they had gotten away with the murder. And then in April 2022, after 4 years of saying nothing, they stopped being quiet about it. And inside 48 hours, one of these men broke. Banks had been working at Yellowstone National Park, and that is where they went and arrested him. In custody, he lied. The next day, agents went to Aaron Etheridge, and he lied too. And then Etheridge went home, thought about it, and called them back. He admitted all of it. He'd hired Banks, and he'd been hired by Arete, Gumrukcu's magician friend, and by Gumrukcu himself. Etheridge described Banks to that jury as a psychopath, someone who needed to be put down. And in a few weeks he'd say it again, with Gumrukcu sitting 10 feet away. So the trial ran 5 weeks in Burlington. And you should know, before we go any further, that the jury would send out no questions at all. Not one. One prosecutor gave the jury 3 words for the whole case: money, manipulation, murder. Gumrukcu's lawyers put a defense on first, business owners, and a Hollywood film producer, all there to tell the jury what a gifted and peaceful healer he was. And then Gumrukcu did something they did not have to let him do. He testified. His own lawyer asked him, seconds in, "Did you know anyone was going to kill Greg Davis?" 3 words: "I did not." Then the prosecution stood up, and they didn't start with the murder at all. They started with the lying, and they made him sit there and go through it. He admitted the unlicensed patient. He admitted taking a partner's money to cover my tracks. He admitted lying to the FBI twice in a murder investigation. And then, walking him through his own business dealings, they got to the line that I think ends this case, because he said there had been so many lies he had trouble remembering them all. So that is the defendant, under oath, at his own murder trial, telling a jury he had lost count. And what do you do with that if you're one of the people sitting in that box? Because they had about 6 hours left to decide. And the courtroom filled up again that Friday afternoon, because word had gone round that they were coming back. So the verdict came back on Good Friday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The foreman read the form out in order, and the first option printed on it is not guilty. Melissa Davis heard those two words first and gasped. Then he kept reading, and the word was guilty. So Jerry Banks got 200 months, and Aaron Etheridge got 140. But the sentencing wasn't the last word in that courtroom, and it wasn't the one anybody remembers. Burke Arate, 110, and Serhat Gumrukcu got life. 20 years on the fraud, running alongside it, and $1.3 million in restitution. And then Melissa Davis stood up in that courtroom, turned toward the man who paid for it, and spoke directly to him. Serhat Gumrukcu, I forgive you. In forgiving, I take back my life. You wrote a tragedy, but I rewrite it in grace. Later, she told the court what that hour meant to her. Good Friday, 3 o'clock. The very hour Jesus declared, "It is finished." And then she said, "Justice has been spoken. It is finished." She was 39 weeks out from that doorway when their 7th child was born. And I'll just tell you, it was a daughter. 7 kids. And a man who thought $100,000 would buy him back $100 million. Be careful who you trust, and take care of yourself. Everything here comes from public court records and news reporting. The images are illustrations, not footage. Some drawn from real photographs. Others are best guess at people no camera ever caught. The facts are not a guess. All of it is true.